So the topic is monetizing your geoscience degree. I hope we actually get to that so that you feel that you got the topic you signed up for. This is my resume and a picture of me. It's there for a couple of reasons. The first one is we're going to make these slides available on PDF so you have a copy. So if you decide to share it, I get the credit for it. It's my name's on there. So my recommendation to you is do the same thing with your presentations, because presentations get pushed all over the place and it's nice to get the recognition. Second thing is, other than the content, is that this is how you can reach me. I got an email the other day from somebody that I had met in passing, and I get a lot of them, and they simply don't put any other way to get in touch with them except email. So my suggestion is put your email address and your telephone number at the bottom, make it your signature, because the number of times you want to get hold of somebody by phone quickly, and like, how do you find their email? How do you find their telephone number? So just make it your default on your email. So that's all there to get hold of me. The other thing I want to draw attention to is that's my full given name. And the reason I use that when I'm presenting or publishing is that during the time I've been in the business, there were 3 Larry Smiths in mining. One guy actually was working at Rio Algom until Friday, and I joined on the Monday. So you can imagine how confusing that was. He went to a bank, and I stayed at Rio Algom. So if you wanted to look me up for anything else, use the full Lawrence Devon Smith, but call me Larry while we're chatting. So I want to talk about geoscience as it's likely as you've experienced in school. And if any of these things look familiar, please let me know. Does that look familiar? Yeah. Okay. And you'll spend a good deal of time becoming familiar with this, and it's a necessary tool in the work you do. You've probably got yourself a kit, and you've probably been out on field trips. Does anybody actually work in the field during the summer? 1, 2, 3 out of 10. Okay. So you might want to consider that for your summers. It'll look good on your resume. I took the liberty of looking up geology, the article on geology in Wikipedia, and I did a Wordle on it. And when you do that, you know that with Wordle, the word that is most often is the word that is biggest in the Wordle. And so you can see that rock came up frequently, earth, geologic, sedimentary, dating. I don't think that was like online dating. I think it's the other kind. You're probably familiar with most of the words there. You would certainly be able to describe them. What struck me as fascinating as a person who does economic evaluations and has spent my life trying to figure out whether a project is going to go or not, is that there were only 2 references to anything related to the money side of it. One was mining, and presumably there's an implication there about reserves. And notice how small it is. And the other one was economic, both very tiny and clearly to the people who are writing this article, and based on my experience, to the profs that are teaching it, utterly irrelevant to geology and geophysics, which is astonishing to me because geology and geophysics are the first step in the process in the industry we call mining, and yet not much of that is taught. So very little time was spent on this, and I suspect that through your courses, unless you choose to take a course that includes evaluations, you won't spend much time on it. I can guarantee you the very first thing you're going to be asked when you start working is somebody's going to say to you, how much does it cost? And you will have no experience in it unless you are able to pick that up for yourself. So did you see, or have you seen anything like this in school? This background with the blue dots is the world population of copper deposits. It's from the Wood Mackenzie report on copper. It's something that we put together when I was at Rio Algom. So it's a number of years old. I don't think they've discovered any new deposits, so it's probably still pretty current. And the heading is, how dead do you want it? I sat down the hall from the vice president of exploration. And anytime anybody anywhere in the world had what they thought was a hot copper project, they'd send it off to all the copper mining companies. And this fella, Kelly O'Connor, would get these things. He didn't want them, so he'd bring them down the hall to me and the fellow I worked with. And we finally got, and they were often dogs. And so we got to the point where we would say to Kelly, well, how dead do you want this thing? How dead do you want it? Because you kill any of them very easily. And what we realized is that we were being brought enormous quantities of these things, and clearly nobody was thinking about what they were bringing us. And so we took the population, the blue dots, and we said we at Rio Algo had a criteria. If we were going to invest in it, it had to be at least of a certain size, and that's relative to the size of our company at that time. It had to be 100,000 tons per year of copper production, and it had to be at least 15 years long. Otherwise, it's not likely it could have carried the cost of building it. If you take that combination, and it's just 100,000 times 15 times the grade, you get a line the shape of that red line. And so if you place that one criteria on it, this is what happens to your population. We then said
with copper price.
It would shift with copper price. Well, actually, that's just production. We haven't got to price yet. Okay. We then said, well, if we wanted to just break even at a cash cost basis, now this is where price gets in, this became our population. But breaking even on a cash cost basis does not pay for building it. And so if you also wanted to build the thing, which you would have had to do, this is what happened. And you can see what's happening. You're getting down to fewer and fewer properties. And we were being brought properties all down in this area. Very few of these were being brought to us because somebody owns these and they're working on them. And then we said, well, that's fine. And what if you wanted also on top of that to make a profit? And when you do that, that's what the population was left with. And all of those properties were very well known and in the industry. The point is, you have to have some sense of the economics of what you're looking for. Now, I'll just go back for a moment. And let's say you're just looking to pay the operating cost and pay the capital and break even. And let's say you found something that's below this red line. It's somewhere down in here. If your dot was down here, what it would tell you, if you're still at the exploration stage, you have to either find more tons or more grade. You want to move yourself over that line. Does that make sense? So it's a targeting concept to give you an idea of what should I be looking for? Should I be looking for more grade? And you know enough about deposits to know that's not likely, but maybe it's bigger. And so you're probably trying to get more tons, although you notice how steep the tonnage side of the line is. Here's another thing that this is from Bill Roscoe presentation that he does, and it's spending money over years, spending money on exploration on a property, and you could spend exactly the same amount of money on a property over a number of years, and so the spending on both of them follows the blue line here or the dotted red line. Well, the spending that you did on property A, the blue line, is showing value in the property, whereas the more you spend on property B, you just keep finding out that it's worse and worse and worse. So just because you're spending money on something doesn't mean it's getting better or that it will get better. And at some point, you have to know when to stop. Now, this shows up in often at very late stages. This is from some work by Pincock, Allen Holt. They are now Monarco, Runge, something. But they still continue to put out these perspectives. This was in August 2004. And the headline and the discussion was, if you've got a feasibility study, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's feasible. In other words, sometimes the answer is no. The problem with that at the feasibility level is there's a very good chance you've been exploring for it, going through the sequence of stages that you go through in studies. You would have done a scoping study or a PEA. You would have done a pre-feasibility study. You would have done a whole bunch of work in between. Finally done a feasibility study. at a cost of millions or tens of millions, or in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars to get you there. And then somebody does the math and says, this thing doesn't work. And often companies reject that information because they've been betting the company on it. Some president has staked his reputation on this project and how good it is. And so they will often go ahead, in spite of the fact that the answer is no, don't do it. So my first bit of how to monetize your degree is, if you're recognizing that this is going nowhere, cut your losses and get out. Or better still, sell it to somebody else who is gullible enough to buy it or thinks that they can find something, because there's a lot of money made in that. So some advice from my years of working on it. Some of this is going to get into, all of these build to a point at the end, but just to walk you through. So making the discovery. This is what I refer to as the mining life cycle. When you talk about mining, to most people, they generally think of the operation. And the operation in a mining, in the mining business is only 15, 20 years long, unless you've got a remarkable deposit, and then it might go on for longer. 100-year deposits are very unusual. 50 years is unusual. But these shorter life properties, very common. But in the scheme of things, the actual length of the operation is not the longest part. And so, in an attempt to give you some scale, I'm just indicating roughly, um, it could be something like 20 years from the time you discover something to the time where you're actually starting to construct. Now, there are examples where they've discovered it and within years they're operating. It's unusual these days. And Jane may talk about that with the social and environmental issues that are making that a longer process. And then before the discovery, the start, there's a whole period where you're out there looking, and this is where I think your careers will find some of your time anyway. You're looking and haven't discovered anything. You're trying to make that discovery. So the discovery is elusive. And if you've got one of those properties like I was describing earlier, where you spend the money and nothing happens, most of the time you're not going to find something worthwhile. The ratio that I've heard, and there are different numbers around, is that of all the things you look at back at the pre-discovery stage, it's something like 1 in 10,000 that get to a mine. So be prepared to look at quite a few things. If you think that everything you're going to look at is going to come to a positive result, you might start getting used to the idea it won't now, so that you're not disappointed. So where would somebody with a geoscience degree find the most likely application of their skill set? And I would suggest to you that mainly up to the point where you're starting to define, start at the scoping level, where you're starting to bring engineers into it, and maybe some metallurgists. Most of the work is being done by geoscience people, geologists, geophysicists, that sort of thing. Once you step over that line into the studies, the geologists, the geoscientists will continue to be part of it, but their role will be swamped by all the technical stuff that's going on with the engineers, the mining people, the metallurgists, the economists, that sort of thing. Environmental will become a very large part of it as well. Once you're in operation, there are some jobs at the operating mine for geologists. There's grade control and that sort of thing. But the biggest area that you are involved in will be in this period. So your likelihood is that your career will be in that time period. Unless, and I'm going to come back to the unless you create your own company. Okay, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Now, having said all of that, I just want to talk about the levels of studies that are common in mining. The normal sequence of events for a study that is in the post-discovery period, so something significant has been discovered, you'll do a scoping study, or what you hear more often nowadays is a preliminary economic assessment, because that's been described and defined and accepted now in 43101, National Institute 43101. You would then, usually with some work being described here, go on to do a more detailed study at a pre-feasibility level. And if the pre-feas is successful, you do a bit more work and you would go to the feasibility level. And at that stage, if you have a successful feasibility study, you've got something you take to your senior management and to the banks for approval to go ahead and for financing. Increasingly, this is the area of engineering, and you're sort of moving out of it. Your area would have been here with the geological reports, except for National Instrument 43101 reports, which continue throughout. So you'll start right at the very beginning when you find anything. You could write a 43101 report. I know Barrick does 43101 reports on all of its operating mines every year or every other year. And certainly because resources continue after the mining, there's always something left in the ground. You can still do a 43101 report after the thing is closed down. There are all kinds of mines around where people have gone back a decade, 2 decades later and started to mine it again because there was a resource left in the ground. Not a reserve, but a resource. So you may find yourself involved throughout, but certainly more intensely in the early years. Although all of these reports, any of the ones in pink, would require input by geoscientists. Just to give you a feel for what you're up against here, and it may help guide you in how you go about looking for the discovery. This was some work that was done. I'm not quite sure the date. I think it was sometime in the last 10 years anyway. And it was talking about how people find things. And these are the percentages, and they, I believe, add up to 100%. And what it suggests is how many of the deposits in the world, the operating mines, what he calls a giant deposit, so something that would become a mine, presumably. How were they discovered? Well, the sort of classic accidental discovery accounts for almost none of them. Greenfield, that is going out to look for something that is geologically favorable. Tell me if some of this sounds familiar to what you've been told in class. You know, we're going to go out and target an area that's geologically favorable, about 5%. New discoveries in a known belt, 20%. In other words, if you want to start looking for something, go to somewhere where they found it already and look around where they found it. And the best example I can think of is that if you go to the Greenstone Belt in northern Ontario, northern Quebec, if you could see far enough, you could stand on the top of one head frame in Quebec and you look all the way to Timmins and the darn things line up. So, you know, where are you going to look for gold in Greenstone? Somewhere between the head frames where nobody has been able to get deep enough to look yet. Exploration based on known but previously insignificant occurrences. In other words, go back and look at the old reports and find something that somebody wasn't thinking about, or as Nathan points out, in a different price regime, 37%. New resources in abandoned mines, it's only 4. Now, this was his pool, but he's also talking about giant discoveries. Usually, if it's a giant discovery, you would have found it. And those, the ones in blue, are for emerging companies. These are companies that are starting up and starting to look. Mines that have been operating, discovered buried deposits beside or underneath the operating mines, 3%. Continuous increases in tonnage at active mines, 20%. And I would imagine the Goldcorp example was probably the last one. So you can see that about 77% of these things are coming out of just 3 known belts, known areas, and the bottom of existing mines. So good luck in trying to find a brand new deposit in the 5 or 6% that is shown up there.
It actually ends up 90.
Yeah, there's something funny going on there.
It's a trick.
It's probably a trick question. Nobody noticed but you. That's good. This is a description of how people have been finding deposits over time. The graph starts in 1900 and it goes up to 2013. And you can see the proportion of people, or proportion of deposits that were found by the classic prospector. The lone person, generally male, although these days a lot of females are doing it too, that just go out and they have a feel for it, and they have no particular training, but they've got some knowledge that allows them to go out and think they're going to find something. And they accounted for a good deal of what was found back in the early 1900s. Extrapolating from known mineralization, though, accounted for a good deal of the rest of that, and it's continued to be a major source of mineral discoveries, and that table suggests that's also the case. Geological mapping, I would have thought that that was getting better as we've gone along, but it seems to be a diminished result. Now, I don't know if that's because everything's been mapped. I doubt that's the case, but it looks like it's a smaller proportion. And what's definitely happened in the last few years is certainly, well, for me, a few years, back in the 50s, right after the war, geochem and geophysics. Geophysics, a lot of that came out of the Allies hunting for German submarines out in the ocean, and they developed magnetometers and EM to find them, and they brought them back. They were airborne, naturally, because they're flying over water, so they took them and flew over land to see what they could find, and it turned out to find quite a few things. So it came up very suddenly after the war, and has continued to be a major source. Just to give you a feel for how these things are being discovered to use in your work. Um, Another thing that you want to get your head around, and I alluded to it a little bit, is the timeline involved in this. Now, these are um, base metal mines. They're not gold mines, and they're not coal or uranium. They're base metal, so you don't have a lot of environmental issues necessarily around them. It talks about the exploration years, the study years, financing and permitting, construction, and when they started production. And here's the number of years from the time of discovery to the time of production. And this period here, and again, Nathan's going to spot this, why does that end up being 20, but the average is 46? And I think these are time passed, and this is a count from the day it was discovered to the day that it went into operation. But you can expect, in this case, 21 years on average from the time that it's discovered, and of course you've got all the time before that is not included here until it goes into operation. So expect a long lead time. In other words, in your career, if you have a career of 40 years, you might be involved from start to operation in 2 life cycles. So
I think the current average is 33.
33 years?
Today, yeah.
Okay, so, and I'm going to show you a table, but this permitting, that 3.3 is just getting longer and longer. So that would probably account for what you're saying. This is saying essentially the same thing. Is this something like what you were talking? This is the life cycle delays. It's taking longer and longer to get things to market. In 1985, at the start of the graph, it was somewhere around 5 years, and now it's usually somewhere between 20 and 25. It just takes longer, and a good deal of that is permitting. I'm giving Jane a whole bunch of things to explain to her.
You are. That's why I'm making a note.
Okay, so let's talk about the business of mining, because that is the business you're in. You're not in the business of geology. I'm not even sure there is a business of geology. You're in the mining business. Unless you're going to work for a government where you are working with a Department of Mines or something like that, and their sole purpose is to support the mining industry and encourage development. So you're still going to be in the mining industry. The first point I want to make, and this is that same life of mine scale, is there's a great deal of risk of finding something. There's a great deal of uncertainty around it, and if you spend a lot of money, it's all at risk. As you move towards, is through the study stages and move towards operation, the level of risk starts to go down because you're looking for something, you've discovered something, you're more certain about it, you're increasingly certain, and then finally when you're in operation, it's about as certain as you ever get. So you could argue the shape of that isn't a straight line, but for the purposes of the diagram, that's what I've drawn. So where in that do you fit in? Well, if you're a prospector, and some of you may, any of you plan to go out and do some prospecting? Well, plan to be employed by mining companies, government agencies, that sort of thing? Going to make you money on the stock market? Not showing too many hands here. Okay, all right, one hand, yeah, there's one. Okay, so the obvious place for the prospectors is way back at the beginning when it's extremely high risk, but they don't have anything to lose. It's all upside for them. So you experience they will be in here. The junior mining companies, and now I'm talking about mining companies. Junior mining companies come in actually right from the very beginning, overlapping with the prospectors, and they will develop right through until typically you get into the point where you're starting to either have reserves or getting close to having reserves, at which point most junior companies, if they're honest with themselves, will say, we're not capable of going the next step and building and operating this thing. And so they will sell on to somebody else. That's not unusual. Although some juniors have become mining companies by building and operating. And then there are mid-sized companies or majors, and they will typically be the ones that will have the capability of operating. They'll have the talent pool, they'll have the money, the resources to do that. But a lot of them go back into this stage. And I know, for instance, Barrick has an exploration department with a big budget, and they go right back to look for things from scratch. So some of them do go back. But broadly speaking, this is where, again, the level of risk, the higher the risk, the smaller the company with less to worry about. The banks, of course, the whole idea of a bank is they'll lend you money if you don't need it, because they want to be sure they're going to get paid back, right? So they're right there at the point in time where there's the least possible risk, and then they want to be paid really quickly so there's no exposure to them. That's a typical banker. And so the banks do get into this, but they're out at the end. Now, some of you may end up working for banks. I know a couple of geologists that have done that. And when they do that, the banks will look at sort of in this area where they're seeing how valid is this thing, and do we want to expose our money to it? Yep.
How typical are junior mining companies will have like a joint venture with mid-sized or major mining companies to belong to the project?
Okay.
You can just repeat
it. Yeah. The question is how likely is a junior mining company to have some sort of an agreement with a mid-size or a major? That's a great question. I want to address that. If I don't get to that by the end, you remind me again. But I've got a slide on it. I'm pretty sure, and I want to. Could be a long answer.
Can I give him a short answer?
No. Oh, all right.
Like for us in Mexico, we built a whole mine for $13 million, but we have a $4 billion project in Argentina, so we can build the small ones, but we would have to joint venture for multi-billion dollars. So it depends on the side.
Yeah. And the danger, if Nathan's company is capable of building a 13 million, but not a 4 billion, the problem with getting involved with somebody in the 4 billion is that quite often they will spend you out of it. They have the capacity to keep spending, and your portion, you're going in at some ratio, they'll very quickly spend you down so you don't have much. So what you always want to do, and you probably have this, is if you're being spent down and by spent down, I mean they're spending money on capital and it's starting to get bigger and bigger than they expected, and you can't chip it in, so you give up ownership to let them carry on. At some threshold, that the requirement for you to contribute money should be written up so that it switches over to a royalty, and you get essentially bought out for a royalty. Otherwise, they'll suck all the money out of your company, and you'll have nothing.
Or wheat you have. Or
simply wait you out. Yeah. So you should always have that fallback that you get a royalty. So this is the talk I was going to give later. What a lot of juniors do is they specifically intend never to build the thing. They're going to sell it on to somebody and get a royalty. So get some cash, get a royalty, and go and find another one, and do it again, and that's where they make their money. And there's a lot of that goes on in the junior market. Just to give you a feel for the number of these, this is the number of companies. I believe this is in Canada, and this is 2014. So it's roughly right. The number of companies with producing mines, 192. The number of companies in development, and they may overlap, 131. The number with advanced exploration, 874, and just general exploration, which would be the early part that we're talking about, 1,099. In other words, it's sort of this triangular shape to the industry, with the majors and mid-size up here, coming down to the juniors down below. And in fact, that's what this graph is trying to say. The majors, they're almost household words. If you ask, you go home and ask your spouse or your partner, name me a major mining company, they can probably name 2 or 3 of them because they're common names. They think of Barrick and Rio Tinto, RTZ, and that sort of thing. The mid-sized companies, and the majors they'd be multinational. They might have dozens of operations. They're into everything. There's no particular metal that they're in. So that would be a major. A mid-size, most actual mining companies, not the people in the exploration part of it, are mid-size. They have 3 or 4 mines, a couple of countries perhaps. They're doing some exploration, they're doing some development. I don't know, would you consider McEwen to be a mid-size?
Yeah, I mean, we have 3 operating lines.
Okay, so yeah, that's a mid-size. Some people try to draw a line with market capitalization. How many are all your shares worth? You could do it that way if you want. And then you get into the juniors, and that's that big number that I was showing just in the last slide. But juniors, you have to be careful because I've shown 3 levels here. You could have a junior that has an operation. So they're a producing junior. It's possible. There certainly are some around. You could have a junior that's in the development stage. And what that means is they've found something and they're taking it through the stages, trying to get it hopefully into production or get it far enough along that they can sell it on. You have to realize if you've put one drill hole through something and you've discovered it, okay, that would be the discovery. You put a drill hole through a porphyry deposit. No, porphyry's too big. VMS deposit. So you've got a VMS deposit, right? But all you have is one hole. The value you add by having 2 or 3 holes and doing a scoping study or a PEA and then doing a few more and some metallurgical test work and going on to the next stage of study, you add an enormous amount of value to it. And so that's what these folks would be doing. And then down at the bottom, and this is certainly the largest proportion, are the juniors that are a vehicle either for exploration only. That's where they are at this point, or the guys that are just in it for promotional purposes. They're trying to milk the stock market, essentially using mining as the vehicle. If you want to meet a lot of these people, go to the PDAC in March, and there are rooms full of them. And so when I say promotional, it doesn't mean they're dishonest. It just means they're very optimistic. Okay, almost euphorically optimistic. But anyway. But listen to their stories. Go into the is it called the Investors Exchange? And the course, and just talk to them. And they're gung ho and they're keen and just say to yourself, where are they in all of these graphs that I've shown you? Where do they actually sit? And it might be eye opening. So walking through juniors, and I'm focusing on juniors because I suspect that as geoscience folks, you may spend a lot of time either in this time frame or working for juniors, or I'm going to suggest creating a junior because it may be the only vehicle you have to do what you like doing, which is the geology, the geophysics, the geoscience. Okay? It may be that. So typical junior, they obtain the mineral rights by staking the claims, if they stake them themselves, or from the landowner, they make some sort of a deal, or from the prospector who staked the claims. So they somehow get the mineral rights. They negotiate a deal with the landowner and the prospector, and those people will get either a royalty or funds. So if we go with royalty, there's one royalty started already. Okay, so keep track of these royalties. Then the junior goes on and explores. They sell stock into the stock market to raise money to keep exploring. And I'll come back to that. But in Toronto, in Vancouver, is it Perth or Melbourne? Anyway, in Australia, there are markets for raising this kind of fund. Okay, and I'll talk about that in a minute. They do more drilling, they do more promotion, and they sell more shares. They're selling shares, promoting, trying to get the stock price up. Hopefully, it's getting increasingly defined, increasingly requires more funding, and at some point in this sort of generic discussion, the junior can't afford to do it. So it's sort of like when Nathan described with the $13 million project, they could handle that. The $4 billion, they couldn't. Okay, although these companies are a bit bigger than this junior. So what happens is a junior will option or sell it on to a major, and they will take a royalty. So there's a second royalty, because these royalties don't disappear. They just start to add up. So there's a royalty to the original landowner or prospector. There's now a royalty to the junior. If the major puts the money in, and they like putting the money in the ground, it's a phrase. They don't want to give it to the junior, and the junior promises to do it. They actually want to get the money in the ground. The major usually earns an increasing royalty by funding development, and the junior may keep some sort of ownership in it, some percentage. And that's sort of the life of a junior. But typically they have backed out of the deal by the time it gets to be built. Another thing, they don't do this anymore. National Bank Financial used to do this, but they had what they called a burn rate. And they took a look at what the juniors had in the bank, and these would be the listed juniors on the TSX, the other one. Anyway. And what they said is this is how many months of cash they have left. They could figure it out. And some of them had, there's one here with 6 months of cash. In other words, the junior is always running out of money. It's just a way of life. Now, some of them had 3 or 4 years of cash as well. Yeah.
Is it something that the junior mining companies disclose in terms of how is that developed? Is it
if they knew enough to know this, they would be public companies and be required to report. Okay. If it's a private company, there'd be no way to get that information. But they're usually public companies because that's the only way to get the money is to go out and sell stock.
If you go to the investor or the quarter check, that's an easy question. Everyone will say, "What's your burn?" Yeah, that's how much money a month they burn.
So if you've got a junior with $100,000 in the bank and their burn rate is $20,000 a month, they're going to be gone in 5 months. So just a phrase to be aware of and a question to ask. So I'm recasting that life of mine sequence in a stylized table because I want to use this as a backdrop. So we still got the same sequence. You've got the pre-discovery, the discovery, the post-discovery. You've got what I've called an evaluation period, which is where all those studies and ongoing work to bring it up to development, and then finally construction, operation, and closure. And all of these categories of activities that go on in there. The very final one, after discovery here, the very final one is something called relinquishment. Are you going to talk about that? No. Which is where the government finally says to you, after you've shut it down and you've monitored for 100 years, and they say, you know what, you're done. It's okay. We'll take it back. That's where you're finally aiming for. Otherwise, you're committed to keep treating and monitoring. So that's just a backdrop for a couple of slides that I want to show you. So there's the backdrop I just described. But what I've got here now is the typical, and everyone's a bit different, but the typical junior share price graph. And so here you are, pre-discovery. They're going out to raise money with the promise of something. They start to get a sniff, and they go out and raise money, and they're getting some positive results. And then finally, at some point, there is the discovery, and the stocks shoot up, and they keep raising more money. And then, as you would expect, as you keep drilling and defining things, let's say this table is a deposit. And I've been putting holes through this thing. Every time I put a positive hole through, I have a press release and let it out to the public, and the stock keeps going up. Well, you can imagine at some point I'm going to put a hole outside of and that delineates it. So here I've been just finding more and more, and now I've found the end of it. And that's this peak point here. The extent of the deposit is delineated. And now the stock starts to go down. It goes down generally through an orphan, down into what they call an orphan period, where people are doing nothing but spending money to make sure this is a good thing. You get into the construction, and that's expensive, so the stock languishes here. And then as you're starting to move towards operation, you'll get now not the speculators buying here, but you get the institutions buying, and the general public that's astute about mining, and they will buy in through the operating period. As you get towards the end of the life, the value drops off and can actually become negative. And so some people sell out sort of midlife or past that because you're getting into closure and there isn't much left in that operation. If it's part of a bigger company, you probably won't see that drop, but if it's one mine company, you will.
Larry, this is the stock price. What about the market cap? Would it follow the same?
If the number of shares stays the same, the market cap would follow the same pattern. But don't forget, they're selling more and more shares.
Issuing shares all the way.
They'll be issuing more shares here. But the market cap probably stays the same because it's just more shares. It would increase here. Yeah, I think it would follow. I'd have to. You want to do the math, but I'm pretty sure it would follow. So if you find yourself wanting to use your geoscience skills and you're not working for a major company, you may end up working for a junior. If you're doing that, you live and die by this. In fact, you live and die by this part of it here. Because most juniors, certainly the speculators get out at this point, but most juniors are trying to do this and then sell on. So the point to sell on to the major is here, where it's been delineated, and the major now has the money to carry it through. And this is a long period of time. This is that 20 plus years and now 33 to get it up into operation. A junior, at a burn rate that we were talking about, junior can't do that, but a major can. And so if you're a junior, this is where your life is, in here. That's how you make your money. So I'm going to suggest to you that at some point in your career, if you're like me, Nathan, I won't speak for you, but I'm guessing, you're going to find yourself, you're never unemployed in mining, okay? You become independent in mining, right? You're going to find yourself independent with a really hot idea, okay? Now, the hot idea might be you were working for Barrick, you found this discovery working for Barrick, and Barrick has laid you off and dropped the property. And you're sitting there thinking, I'm independent. Barrick doesn't want the property. I know where it is. I know what it is. It was too small for Barrick, but I'm a junior now. So my guess is you will create a 1 or 2 person company and you will become a junior. So my guess is somewhere in your career you may experience that. And that's why I'm focusing on juniors. And that's how you monetize your degree. Because you're not going to monetize your degree by working for somebody else. You'll get paid and it's a great thing. And you'll see the world and it's an exciting business. But I'm pretty sure you're going to find yourself independent at least 2 or 3 times in your career. So you've got to decide what you're going to do with that independence. And this is just saying, if you're in the stock market, you're the buyer, the speculator, you buy here, and the normal expression is you buy low and sell too soon. Okay, so you want to sell in here before it starts down. Going down isn't a bad thing. It just means that it's going into a long period of spending to get to the next stage. So let's talk about this. Why Canada? What I've shown here, of course, I'm Toronto-centric. It is the center of the universe, after all. So I've shown it coming from here, but it also would come from Vancouver. Why Toronto and Vancouver, and a little bit from, I think it's one of the big cities in Australia? Why is that where the junior market is? Because all the juniors are located in mostly in those 3 locations. It isn't they aren't all located there, but mostly. And the reason for that is that Canada and Australia, but Canada's far and away the biggest number, are mining friendly. They kind of get mining. Okay. There is a history of resource development, so we understand that. Although I must say, what they're teaching kids in school today will be lucky if there's mining left anywhere in Canada. But right now, there is a history of it. The stock markets are large markets. They're mining friendly and they're junior friendly. There are people that are willing to throw $10,000 into a junior mining company. Let's see what they get. Because if you get in early and you rise up that peak, your 10,000 becomes something much bigger. And so there's a large group of people willing to do that. There's also a large pool of expertise. If you shot a cannon off and they could hear the sound, within the sound of that cannon, you probably hit most of the expertise in mining in the world would hear it. Here in Vancouver, you think of all the consultancies, the lawyers, the accounting people, all the testers, they're all in these two locations. And so there's a large, and also the investors are experienced, risk tolerant, and mining friendly. So that's why Toronto. That's why PDAC in March is there. Do you guys plan to go to PDAC?
You know what city has the most mining engineers?
Most mining engineers?
Oakville.
Yeah,
That's why it's so expensive.
I'm guessing somebody in the room lives in Oakville. It's probably true. Okay. So the question now becomes one of, and we've talked about this, do you explore or do you acquire? Well, if you're a junior, you hope the answer is you acquire. So you're going to explore so somebody can acquire you. That's the thing. So who's been making the discoveries? So similar to the other charts we were looking at, the juniors are the green. In other words, the juniors have been increasingly, since 1975 to 2015, increasingly accounting for the discoveries. Largely because the majors haven't been finding things. They've been spending ungodly amounts of money and they don't find much. So what they're saying is maybe we should just turn it over to the guys that are finding something. Let them go out and look at 1,000 things to find the one we're interested in. And so that's what's been happening. There has been a trend towards juniors finding more of the properties. The other one that accounts for anything here, pretty much, is the major. And this is one of the reasons, and I alluded to this earlier. This is the business cycle, and there's no particular time scale on this, although it's something in the range of 8 to 10 years, maybe a bit longer. And there's a definite pattern to it. As things start to improve in the cycle, you get M&As, buyouts, that sort of thing up here. People start to spend more money as it starts to rise up to the peak of the cycle. And then once you get over the cycle, people start to divest. They get rid of stuff, decrease exploration spending. It's during this period of divesting that if you know the property and the big company has dropped it, they don't care, that's where you make your move. You go in and buy it at the bottom and hope to catch an acquisition on the way up at the next cycle. So this is, again, I hope this is answering the question of monetizing your degree. And then there are articles, this is just showing you one article about explore or acquire. What from the big mining company's point of view, it's cheaper to discover it, but it's faster to acquire it. From the junior's point of view, there's only one answer. You want to discover it and then be acquired. Juniors in risky countries, mostly what this is saying is that juniors will go into these risky countries, but there's a big concern. And if you are working for a junior, or if you're working for exploration in any form in a developing area, actually these days any country, you guys are, as geoscientists, you are the first people to contact. And you have to make sure, and this is, I'm going to do it from two sides. This is the angel talking on one side and the devil talking on this side, you know the cartoon? Okay, so the angel is saying, you've got to do it because it's appropriate and responsible to be open, transparent, and honest with the local people. Okay? That's the way we want to do it. The devil is saying, for heaven's sakes, don't pee in the bathwater. If you're going in and you're the first people there, have a good rapport so that when you go to sell it to the next guy, the first question they're going to ask is, do the locals like you? Have you done anything that's going to turn them anti-mining? And if you can say, no, everything's fine, and go and meet them and talk to them. So, big responsibility if you're the first people in. Be responsible. Do it properly. I know just before I was downsized out of Barrick, they were starting to put CSR people onto every drill crew. So that if there was a conversation to be had with the locals, there was somebody there trained to have that conversation. It wasn't every drill crew, it was the exploration crew that had the drillers.
Just look at the expectation. You show up, they're thinking I'm getting a Mercedes, and you're thinking, well, it's going to take 30 years before they see something, maybe 1 out of 10,000 chance. So the expectation between the devil and that angel is very different.
Yeah. The one thing you can do is buy your food from the local supplier. If you can, simple things like.
No, but it's really can't.
Sorry, forgive me. I should have made a list.
Pizza now.
I thought you might be interested in this. These are color coding. The green is sort of our Western view of what's a safe country. The red is our Western view of what's an unsafe country. And of course, and everything in between. The juniors are quite comfortable in here because they're willing to go to places that are unexplored and maybe a little riskier. And so it's not unusual to find the juniors looking in places where a major, for instance, wouldn't go. A major would want to go to the green and maybe the light green countries. But the juniors are willing to go somewhere else. Yes?
Just curious, why Mongolia and China are risky?
Would you put your money in China?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, okay. Well, there's a definite yes, possibly. Okay. So, interesting you raise that point. That is the Western point of view. Okay. This is China's point of view. Look where China doesn't want to go. And it's kind of encouraging. Canada and is that Norway or Sweden? Sweden? Okay, that's Sweden. Two places where transparency, honesty, integrity, where does China feel quite comfortable going? All the places we wouldn't go because of the lack of responsibility, the bad reputation, but China's comfortable there. Okay, so if you're a Chinese junior, the world's your oyster except for Canada and Norway.
Well, because they got worked by potash and the government won't let them buy our resources.
Well, there's that too. Yeah.
So this is 2016. Do you think it's still applicable? Like Barrick just bought Rand Gold, right? They're trying to go back into Africa.
Yeah, but look at the color of South Africa. It's sort of mid, and they were buying it as much for management and other potential, I think. But yeah, good question. And we're waiting to see what they sell off now that they've merged. They're going to start selling things off. Anyway, I thought you might like to look at that. So career opportunities. With 5 minutes to go, I'm going to race through this bit, but what I want to draw your attention to is you could spend your time, you could make your career choice based on a number of things. First of all, by activity. Are any of these things of interest to you? Do you want to work in any of these activities? Some of you might want to get into economics and finance. I thought I wanted to be a civil engineer until I took a course in economics. I thought, oh boy, that's neat. So by activity, by mineral. People specialize. If you started in gold, you'd probably stay in gold. If you started certainly in coal, you'd probably stay in coal. So depending on the mineral, if you have a real liking for some of these things, by the kind of employer. Do you want to work for a company? Do you want to be a consultant? Do you want to work with the government or an NGO? What kind of employer do you want? A type of mining, if you're a mining engineer more than a geoscientist, which of these turns your crank? Where do you want to live? In mining, I worked with guys that lived all over the world, and they're quite happy. Although they all want to move back to Oakville when they're finished. But pick a place. Where do you want to work? Or maybe you're somebody who well, let's do a show of hands. How many of you absolutely have to live in Toronto throughout your career? How many of you want to spend a lot of time in the bush? Okay, you just think so. But anyway, you just wait until you've seen Oakville. I'll tell you. Or anywhere in between. I'll give you a bit of advice. For those of you who want to work in the bush, don't marry a local. Okay? Because you've got an education from a large university in the downtown core, don't marry a local. But that was advice I was given. I'm just sharing it with you. That's probably. Career moves. Expect the unexpected. So this is the classic. This is what I thought when I graduated. Okay, I'm going to graduate. I don't know what I'm going to do, but somehow I'm going to move up the chain and eventually become very high in management, if not the CEO. And then I'm going to retire and maybe do something interesting after retirement. That was my career path. And that's most people think I'm going to do something like that.
And now we pay you with beer and pizza.
Now we pay him. The first thing I'm going to suggest to you is that somewhere early on, you're probably going to branch into either being a technical person or a non-technical. And by non-technical, I mean you're probably going to end up in management of some sort. Okay? Don't worry about this. I actually ended up going up the technical route and became a technical expert. All right, and it paid very well, not as well as management, but it paid very well. Don't be disappointed if you thought you're going to be the president and you end up being the world's most renowned geologist, okay? But do expect that likely to happen. I didn't expect it, and it took me a while to get my head around it. And you might go back and forth. Okay? So that might come in your career. The next thing is, and we've talked about this, there will be periods of up and down in the metal prices. And so there will be a period where you will find yourself independent. And these are famous points of independence. In mining, what happens is a lot of people that found themselves independent got an honest job in another industry. And so now, with all of us baby boomers retiring out and you guys coming along, I mean, what took you so long? 40 years, jeez. There's a gap. And there's because people left during these downturns. And so you're looking at guys that are younger than me, Nathan's age, and he's not that much younger, are filling the gap. But you're going to rush, you're going to have a vacuum to fill. So expect rapid advancement. Okay? When you sign your employment contract, if you can swing it, ask for share options because that's where you're going to make your money. Okay? Some of it anyway. So what did I do? Well, this is me in Red Lake doing geophysics in 1970. My suggestion to you, the very first thing is, I get asked, what kind of job should I take? And my advice is go out and pick the hardest thing you can find, get the best experience you possibly can for about 2 years, just to test to make sure this is really what you want. You cannot choose the wrong job for 2 years. Think of it as 2 more years of education. Okay, you'll get paid for it, and you'll have the experiences. And all of you who said bush, okay, reassess after 2 years of being in the bush. You know about black flies, right? Okay. Get some real life experience. Get practical experience. Don't work. I had guys in my class that worked in the summer at pizza places. Oh, it was fine. They got a job, but they learned absolutely nothing about being in the mining business. If you can get varied experience, great. And always choose the tough assignment because that's where the learning and the new discovery is. They're much more rewarding than these assignments. And then it's almost impossible to make a bad decision at your stage of development. I could make a bad decision now and it would screw my life, but you've got lots of time to get over it. This is what happened to my career. I thought I was going in one place. This is me being independent. I was downsized out of 3 companies. By the way, getting downsized was wonderful. The first year I got a year's pay. The second year I got 9 months pay, and the third time I got it was almost 9 months pay. And then the silly asses hired me back 2 weeks later because they hadn't realized I was working on projects for them. So they paid me again to come back as a consultant. So that was me, sort of, I called it management. It was sort of middle management, independent. And I never thought of teaching. When I started out, I hated public speaking. But a friend asked me to cover a course for him at the University of Toronto just for 3 weeks while he was in Kazakhstan. Well, he didn't come back to Kazakhstan. I finished the course and got invited back. And I spent 10 years teaching at U of T. And I'm continuing to do that now. I'm still teaching in retirement. The other thing is, retirement isn't, it's a question mark. I mean, what's retirement today? I mean, the official age that most people, there's no official age anymore. Most people think 65. Jesus, 65, you guys are going to be young. So plan something that's going to take you, carry you through. The other thing, this is Linda Wrong gave me this one. She said, some days you're going to feel like you're on top of the world. Your job, if this is your expectation, the blue line, some days your job is going to just fill you with everything you ever wanted and then some. But there will be times when you get some crap job and you have to work through and be there. And then hopefully it rises up again. So be aware that there may be times when it isn't as good as you thought it was going to be. It will get better. Okay? Or go and start your own company. Then you're the president and you achieve what you set out to do. So any last words? Well, a couple of them. First of all, link in where you can to information about the industry. Now, I've shown analyst reports here. These people tend to follow, they work for the banks. They're getting it harder to get on their mailing list, but if you do get on their mailing list, they tend to follow either companies, lots and lots of companies, or industries. So if you're, say, in the uranium industry, here's the Uranium Weekly by RBC Capital Markets. So you would find people following the industry with insights and thinking about what's going on. One word of caution, don't believe any price forecasts for anything. Okay? They're always wrong. Sorry, they're never right. I was told by my wife not to be so negative. So do try to get on their mailing list. The easiest way to get on them right now is, I think it still works, is tell them you're a student doing research. Could you get on the mailing list? Okay. When you get on the mailing list for anything for the rest of your career, do not give them your company email address. Give them your personal email address. And the reason for that is, how many times was I moved from one company to the other and all my email contacts disappeared? So I never give out, well, I give it out, but also give out your personal email address and get one that doesn't sound like, dumb Geo from the bush. Come up with just your name or something responsible. But make sure you give that out to these people or anybody else you want a long-term rapport with. And also, when you meet somebody, ask them if they would give you your personal email address, because your networking, it'll drop off if they, like Nathan and I both work at Barrick. Not anymore. So if all I have is Nathan's Barrick address, so what? Doesn't mean anything.
But with LinkedIn, it helps.
Well, LinkedIn helps, but not every. Anyway.
And don't put your Barrick email on your LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's right. So get a personal one that sounds good. Okay. The second one is, if you do not already have business cards, get some. You can. Any printer will do them. You can buy this stuff at Staples. My suggestion is also use the back of the card for a mini resume. Okay, you're starting to see a bit more of this. That's the normal front of a card. That's the back of the card. Now, at your stage, you don't have much to put in as a resume, but you've worked on assignments. You've gone to schools, the bush camps probably, or field trips. Put that down until you can replace it with something more. All right. Get involved in the industry. The easy ones in Canada are CIM, the national, and also your local branch in Toronto. Toronto has a CIM branch, but Oakville doesn't.
We do.
No, Mississauga has one. It's called Toronto West. Does that say Oakville? Okay. PDAC. Definitely join PDAC. It's much cheaper. The conference is much better. And it's always in Toronto. Women in mining, Hispanics in mining, there's all kinds of things you can join. And join often and many. That's the thing about the email address. So try to do that. Here's something that you will find will serve you incredibly well. You'll feel like when I did this, I didn't realize I was doing it. I had this guy out in Saskatchewan at the company I work for, and he'd keep phoning me up and asking for things. I don't know. I'll go and find out. And I felt like a complete bloody idiot. So I'd go and find out. I'd send it off to him. I found out years later, this guy spoke highly of me. He thought I was the greatest thing since sliced bread, because if he had a question, he could phone me in. I give him an answer. And I was thinking, geez, I'm a dummy. I don't never know the answer to his questions. Anyway, a presenter said exactly that same thing, and it sort of made me feel better years later. I don't know, but let me find out and get back to you. People will remember that, so do it. Follow up. Stay in touch, okay? Think of yourself as your own company. Promote yourself. Put a good foot forward. Network like mad, and then you know the old story. First year, look to your left, look to your right. Half of these students won't be here at Christmas. Okay, well, you guys right now, look to your left, look to your right. This is the start of your network. Okay, have you got email addresses for each other? Okay. Oh, by the way, don't use your university email address. It looks too much like your academic. Maybe the first few years out, but get a personal address. Okay. And then what you want to do if you're looking for, you want the perfect job, take a job. And once you've got that job, you're being paid, you got a platform, you're getting experience, then look for what they call the opportunity. Look for the dream job. But just get a job. Don't look for the perfect job right out. And if you love what you're doing, you've already been a success. I've been very fortunate. Most of my career, I just enjoyed the heck out of what I was doing. So my final word is network, network, network. Too many young grads, they disappear into a black hole. The profs lose track of them. Their classmates lose track of them. They're not thinking networking. They're out too busy creating their career. But your profs, your classmates, these people are your peer group. So stay networked, get involved with these organizations, and build up your network. So that's my last piece of advice. Thank you. Did that monetize your geoscience degree? Now, is there time for? Well,
We
this
have
isn't
time for
eating.
questions. She just want to get the pizza. that
Okay,
guys
so
here
so I'm going to show you something. The press release. Okay. The way that mining companies communicate with the world is through the press release, especially if they are publicly traded companies that are obliged. Anytime there's a material change, or for mining companies, anytime there's any kind of change, and they think that they raise the stock price or keep it up, they will issue a press release. So, I want to show you the realities of a press release. The family of this gentleman, Remus Starr, found this photograph in their family album. And on the back of it, it said, Remus Starr, horse thief, sent to Montana Territorial Prison 1885, escaped 1887. He robbed the Montana Flyers 6 times. Montana Flyers train that would have carried some sort of valuable thing. He was caught by the Pinkerton detectives, convicted and hanged in 1889. Those are the facts of the case. The family put out the following press release. Or not. This is Apple, so I don't have any idea how to make it move.
Is it the next slide?
It is. There we go. So here's the press release. Remus Starr was a famous cowboy in the Montana Territory. His business empire grew to include the acquisition of valuable equestrian assets and intimate dealings with the Montana Railroad. Beginning in 1885, he devoted several years of his life to service in a government facility, finally taking leave to resume his dealings with the railroad. In 1887, he was a key player in a vital investigation by the renowned Pinkerton Detective Agency. In 1889, Remus passed away during an important civic function being held in his honor when the platform upon which he was standing collapsed. And I'll tell you, read between the lines of every press release because there's a story in there that you want to find out. Okay? We still got a few. No, it's probably not Bill.
Doesn't matter.
One thing I tell my students when I start a class is take a piece of paper and write down red flags. I'm going to tell you some red flags. You'll learn some red flags. What it is the hit list of all the things you've learned to watch for, to not do, like don't step in that, okay? Start keeping a list of these things because it's, what is the expression? Experience is recognizing a mistake the second time you make it. Learn to identify these things so that you don't make the same mistake. So you can pass on information to people. So that is one piece of advice. And then this one, this is just pure for fun. So it's a deposit interpretation. Okay, and you're going to be involved in this as geoscience folks. So here are the drill hole intercepts. And this is the interpretation by a very conservative geologist. You can see that they've decided they're only going to go halfway to the next hole. They're not going to, that's what they're going to interpret. So nothing dangerous at all. This is a relatively conservative geologist, a little bit of continuity there. Now here you're starting to move into an optimistic geologist. All the same intercept, right? There's the very optimistic geologist, extremely optimistic geologist, and then when you finally give the thing to a mining engineer, that's what you get. I will stop there. Thank you very much.